So he worked at Western Union, and he possessed a nice little brogue and very little else. He was very poor. So when I began to draw, I didn't quite understand this fierce urge to draw, and kind of ignored it. So I used all kinds of methods like this toy soldier to draw. Eventually they began to realize that they better pay it some attention. So at Christmas I'd get drawing supplies, and to their consternation, when I got a little older, I bought an etching press, and with the etching press goes things like fat tubes of black ink, which you shouldn't step on. Also nitric acid, which my mother used to find in the kitchen in the mornings after I'd been working all night at my etchings. So I was a puzzle to my family.
Did they think it was a phase you were going through?
No. Quite obviously I was going to be an artist. But you see, in my neighborhood, I was raised in Yorkville, and for the Irish, to be a cop or a priest, that made a lot of sense, or even a mailman, something like that. But to be an artist, there were no artists in Yorkville. They couldn't understand it. So, when I was about 12, there was a store, Wanamaker's, that had a drawing contest for school children. So I still have a letter that said that I won 2 medals out of a contest of 18 or 20,000 children. So having won 2 medals, it began to look as if it was a serious profession for me.
What were your favorite comic strips at the time? Did you read comic strips? Did you have your own artists that you wanted to study from?
Yeah, there's a guy named Cliff Sterrett. He wrote Polly and Her Pals, and I love the cat that he had. There was a cat that watched all the grown-ups and reacted to them. It was very well done. He was a fine artist, I think. Also Crazy Cat. Yeah.
Were you into the adventure comics at all?
No, there weren't any. If you had
Tarzan in the 30s started coming out.
Now realize how old I am. I'm 80 years old. There weren't any adventure things. There were Mutt and Jeff, a thing called Happy Hooligan, a tramp with a can on his head, and things like that. Oh, and the Katzenjammer Kids, of course. But no adventure stories, good God. No.
That was later in the 30s?
Oh, yeah, much.
Yeah, then your father took you to the movies, and you saw Winsor McKay to the
Yes, I actually saw Winsor McKay do his Animal Act, and it was a smash.
Did that get you interested in animation at this point?
No, not at all. No. I got interested in animation as a accident, you know. I was going to a vocational school. It was a 2-year high school up in Harlem. It was the only high school in the city that taught any commercial art. So I went there, and in the mornings we had academics, you know. In the afternoon we had drawing. Well, the teachers of academics were not very good. It was a big bore. So I took to making drawings instead of listening. And one of my friends there, his name is Lance. It was my age. He said, you know, my brother has a studio. Maybe I'll show him these drawings. So I said, fine. So he took them off, and the next morning he said, my brother says that when we're through school, you have to come to see him, and maybe he'll give you a job. So when I graduated, I began to look around for some work, and then I remembered this man, so I went to see him. And the company was J.R. Bray. Bray was the pioneer animator who made a deal for movies on a regular basis back in 1918. So this is 1924, 6 years later. He's still doing very well. And he had a young man in charge of his place. Also, his name was Lance, his first name Walter. And so he was very impressed by my work indeed. He gave me a job as an errand boy at $12 a week. Very impressed. Anyhow, I ran errands, and once in a while I was allowed to do a little bit of what they call opaquing, you know, putting the paint on the back of the cells. And finally I did some inking, and in the meantime, at 12 o'clock, instead of going out to eat lunch, I'd nibble a box of Oreos or something like that and do some animation. So after about a year and a half, I actually animated something that appeared on the screen.
What was your first piece that you did?
It was a monkey reaching into a barber's hot towel thing. You remember those round things?
Sure.
They used to have the hot towels. Well, he picked out a hot towel and he juggled it. That was the shot. So I was about 16 and a half.
Well, how old were you when you first saw Winsor McCay perform?
Oh, I must have been 9 or 8 or somewhere around
Talk
there.
to us about that a little bit, the experience and his process with Gertie the dinosaur.
Well, I don't remember it all that well, you know. I just remember he appeared in jodhpurs and had a riding whip, and he came out, and then they ran the movie, and he would yell, "Gertie, sit up," and she'd not quite, and he'd be more insistent. She finally would do it. And the very end of it, of course, was a big hit. He held this red apple up, and he threw it, or he pretended to throw it, and on the screen appeared this red apple and went right in Gertie's mouth. And that was the end of the thing. But big hit. It's a good showman.
When did you know you would spend full time in animation, not go back to?
Well, you see, all the years I was at J.R. Bray, on weekends and nights, I was being a fine artist. I really didn't want to do any cartoons at all. I wanted to do etchings and paintings and so forth. So I had an easel and an etching press and the whole thing. And I worked every weekend. Instead of going out to play, I worked on these etchings and paintings and stuff. So I was very seriously going to be an artist. But the problem was how to eat, you know. It was very necessary that I bring in the money. So I had a fantastic life. I had a lot of energy. In fact, my father, I inherited from my father, he had 2 8-hour-a-day jobs. 2. I don't know how he did it, but he did it for years. So my stint was 8 hours at Bray's, 3 hours as an artist model at a school at $1 an hour, and then I'd go home and start working. But I didn't work on my drawing yet. I washed several hundred cells for a penny apiece. So I might wash 300 cells or something like that. And then around midnight, I would actually begin my trade, in fact. And I would work at painting or etching or drawing, whatever, until about 3 in the morning. And the reason I quit is the milkman's horse used to come, and I hear, oh, I thought, my God, I'm up too late, and I run off and go to sleep. And I have about 3 hours of sleep. I did this for years. And in in this work, I was making about $28 or $30 instead of 12 by doing all this extra work. And one thing that was a very good experience, since I was very young and in very good shape, I was on a track team besides everything else. I had good muscles. So I could get almost any job I wanted in an art school because most of the models were old people, rather decrepit. So I would work at that, and in effect, I heard every art teacher, just about every art teacher in New York, and the only guy who sounded like any sense was a man named Ashel Gorky. I don't know if you know him. Oh, well, he was a very good painter. He was an American, in spite of the Russian name, and his work was very good. Except he killed himself when he was still a young man. But he was making a lot of sense because he was saying things like, this young man has a back. So we're not looking at the back, but he does have one. So why don't you draw as if he has a back instead of this kind of thing? He hated to teach, it was very obvious. But of course he was poor. So I grew to not like any art teachers because they all had tricks like this is woman is 7 heads high and all nonsense.
Just do it, don't learn.
Yeah. So they all had this machinery, but no brains. Anyhow, I finally quit that when, in the beginning of sound, well, what happened is Bray went broke. Walter Lantz went out to Hollywood to be a gag man, and I went to work over at the Crazy Cat studio. And this turned out to be a den of iniquity. They were two men, Harrison and Gould, and they were running a cheap slug house where if you got up to talk to somebody, one of these two guys would have a beady eye and he'd call out. It was all in one room, so you could see everybody. He'd ask why you got up. It's like jail, So I hated them both. And so I paid no attention to animation. I didn't do any more. I was intent on my artwork. Finally, they moved to Hollywood, and since I was pretty nasty with them, they didn't invite me to go. So by the time I was a regular inker, and a very good one, otherwise I would have been fired long before because I was very insolent. But they had tricks like they come around and say, you expletives are going to work on Thursday night. So we'd have to work for nothing. And I really hated that. So
why were you so you didn't like working there?
I didn't want to work for nothing, No, I hated the place, Walter Lantz was very interested in my work and helped me out a lot. Almost every noon I'd stop by his desk and show what I was doing. But these two slug owners were not interested in anything except making these terrible movies.
But Crazy Cat was making money, wasn't it?
Oh, it was so bad. The studio was owned by a guy named Charles Mintz, who is a real villain in the business. And so I guess the deal was for very little money. And so they tried to take it out of us. Anyhow,
what was interesting, if we could discuss for a second, just
sure,
that the producers always had their names above the titles. Frank Capra, you knew it was a Frank Capra film. But like Schlesinger, Bray, they all took the credit for people that did the work. Otto Mesmer created Felix the Cat,
yeah, right.
And the world knows him. Today,